So, first of all, my name is Amy Nathan. I wanted to thank everybody for coming here today and to spending some time with us. We have a really great panel and we're going to get right to it. But first, I want to tell you a little bit, if you don't already know, about Growmentum Lab. Growmentum Lab is a business accelerator in cannabis, and we support specifically social equity applicants. We work across the entire seed to sale value chain. We work with hemp and CBD, as well as ancillary companies, anyone that is within the hemp and cannabis industries. And our goal is to transform communities and use cannabis and use hemp as the tool for economic development and community transformation. And I see that we are joined here by Donna Miller also. Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioners Miller and Lowry. I'm going to introduce you both formally, but first I just wanted to give a word. This is the first in our 4-part web series. And in fact, today we've been talking about creating a 5th. We'll talk about that in between the 2 segments. We've got 2 amazing segments today. The first part, our Cook County Commissioners have joined us. They've given up their time. Can't wait to introduce them. They're going to talk a little bit about what is taking place, the process that we are all in right now, what we know, and then we will also present them with some of the comments and feedback and questions that we received from our community, which is really exciting. So it'll be sort of in a Zoom version of a fireside chat, if you will, in the summer. So I don't know how much fireside is happening. And then secondly, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and attorneys Akele Parnell and Sandy Stein are going to talk a little bit about rulemaking and how to get active and how to get organized. So we're going to change gears a little bit, but we're going to still talk about advocacy from just a different perspective. Our future topics are completely different. We're going to have our next topic is going to be 2 weeks from yesterday. It's going to be on real estate and all that you need to do. Of course, if you're if you're hoping to be a dispensary owner, you've got a different concern than if you're hoping to be a craft grower or infuser on real estate. So that's going to be a really interesting topic. The one after that is going to be what's the difference between your application team and your operations team. Maybe they're not exactly the same. And so we're going to try to ground you in the reality of the skills that you need and how prepared you really are to start to mobilize your team. And then the last one, which is going to be basically 8 weeks from today, is all about what do you need to do to hit the ground running, and how do you start your operations, and what do you think about first and next, etc. We've got some amazing experts at all these different topics who are going to be joining us. You may have noticed them on the Eventbrite. We hope to see everybody there. But for now, I wanted to introduce our first 2 panelists. Well, let's say speakers. Bill's going to do a lot more of the speaking. Commissioner Donna Miller is also here from the 6th District, who is super, super interested in hearing what you all think, and also in economic development issues as well. And we'll get into that into just a minute. And we'll also introduce Robert Johnson, who'll be moderating for today. So Bill Lowry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cannabis Commissioner for Cook County and the Commissioner for the 3rd District. He is a lifelong Southsider, a husband and a father, practicing attorney for over 30 years of Nyhan, Bambrick, and Kinsey Lowry, Commissioner Lowry. He serves on a number of college boards where he helps start scholarship funds for students of color, engaging minorities, female and veteran entrepreneur enterprises. In 2013, when Hadia Pendleton was tragically taken by gun violence, just steps from the commissioner's backyard, he started the Time Organization, or TITO, a nonviolence organization which provided after-school programming and summer internships for high school students. As Cook County Commissioner, Commissioner Lowry works to foster economic development through the 3rd District. His premier piece of legislation, the Good Faith Effort Transparency Report, provides governmental transparency and promotes participation for MWBPEs, minority, women, and people with disability businesses. Those are important initials that everybody on this call should know. Another premier piece of Commissioner Lowry's legislation was forming the Cook County Cannabis Commission, which we're really excited about, has the primary goal to ensure that social equity applicants are able to contribute and benefit in this new industry. So you're in a really good place to be here with us today. And that social equity applicants are able to contribute and benefit from the whole industry. So we're really excited that you're here. We're excited to hear the collaboration that we're going to have with you today. Commissioner Miller is the Miller for the 6th District. She's also she's a wife and a mother of 2, and the vice chair of contract compliance and workforce development for Veterans Committee, or for the Veterans Committee, and chairman of the Forest Preserve and District Contract Compliance Committee. She has a background in healthcare, so she and I have a lot in common in that regard, working with leading pharmaceutical companies. Donna has tremendous experience in sales, training, development, bringing together collaboration for new businesses with healthcare companies, which is right up the alley with cannabis as well. Commissioner Miller has been involved with community, civic, and political activities throughout her life, including time in Washington, D.C., with the Red Cross, working communities disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS and sickle cell. We are so happy to have you here with us, Commissioner Miller. Thank you for joining. Robert Johnson, we are so thrilled that you're going to be here, a moderator. Robert and I go back at this point a whole year and a half since the time that this was really being discussed, not even as a bill yet. Robert is a board member and the secretary of our board for Gromentum Lab. Robert has an amazing background. He is a lawyer by trade, but he calls himself a lawtrepreneur. I've heard him say it. I can't really pronounce that word very well, but he's really good at it. He was general counsel, worked with McDonald's for many, many years, is a managing partner in a social enterprise group called the Solomon Group, and is now got a really fancy, awesome job with the YWCA. He is working as the the inclusion officer and economic development. I don't know all the different ways
Don't worry about it.
But it's a pretty cool thing because everybody knows of the great work that YWCA does in the community. So thank you for agreeing to moderate. Thank you to both of the commissioners for being here today. I'm going to go on mute until we switch over to the second panel, but thank you for being here.
All right, thank you, Amy. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. First off, I just want to pick up the thread where Amy left off, and that is to thank both Donna and Bill, who are 2 very dear friends that I called to see if they could help straighten out this mess that's going on in Illinois. And I know that these 2 folks can definitely do it. As Amy said, one of the things that we really want to do is to create sort of an open dialogue. Unfortunately, given the format that we've selected, is going to involve a lot of kind of back and forth between myself, Bill, and Donna. And then if we have enough time, we'll try to open it up to the rest of the participants for some Q&A. But what we did in advance was we solicited a number of questions and primarily 3 categories from the SEA community to the extent that we could. And they were really bucketed around the process for the application, the experiences that folks have had, good and bad, and then any other general comments regarding the whole process that folks may have thought was unfair or need to be improved. So that's kind of the backdrop, just so that the viewers kind of know where the questions are coming from and sort of the theme of the questions. Other thing, full disclosure, I want to give a shout out again to both of my panelists. One, Donna first. I mean, as Amy said, she jumped at the opportunity to hear from our constituents, basically, with regard to just their experiences, to be able to craft better process, procedures, and just an environment for not just SEAs, but for the entire community, particularly in the Southland. And then a shout out to Bill. When I first saw the email that he was forming this Cook County Cannabis Commission, I think I was during the holidays. I think I was in Texas, and I sent him a text like, "Dude, I'm. How can I help you?" And he's like, "You're on the commission." Okay, all right.
Right.
So again, thank you both for your leadership. So what I want to start is by where I ended. So Bill, can you just give us your vision for the Cook County Cannabis Commission? I know Amy kind of read off a little bit about its formation, but just for us cousins, tell us what that means.
Well, first, let me thank Grow Minimum for the invite. I want to thank you, Amy, and then you, Robert. Robert, you're like a brother to me. I mean this. I don't think I've done anything over the last 15 years without us in some way collaborating, and it's just wonderful. It's been wonderful. It continues to be wonderful. You heard Amy talk about my initial ordinance as a Cook County Commissioner, the Good Faith Effort Transparency Report. That really gives you an overview of my role as I see it as a commissioner. And it started before I was elected commissioner. Robert, you know this. I served as vice chair of the Capital Development Board. First African-American to be appointed to that board. I was appointed by Quinn. I was made vice chair by Rauner. But I quickly saw my role there was to make sure all of the state contracts that we as a board were asked to approve would only be approved after we knew what the participation was and what was the inclusion relative to minority business enterprises, relative to women business enterprises, and relative to our veteran business enterprises. I did that every meeting. I started quarterly reporting relative to that. And I took that same passion for inclusion and participation with me to the county. And that's why with the Good Faith Effort Transparency Report, what we're saying is, before anyone who's bidding on a Cook County contract will be granted a waiver, full or partial when requested, they're going to have to show us as commissioners their efforts at inclusion and participation. And they're gonna have to do that by completing this form. So this is really just another level of the same passion. When we came to know that we were going to have this recreational cannabis legislation coming down in Illinois, and I started reading about components of the legislation, such as social equity applicants piece and the disproportionately impacted areas piece, my mind immediately went to, we have to shine a light on this. We have to come up with a way to make sure that this legislative intent actually occurs. Because often if you don't, Robert, you don't see certain components of legislation actually permeating throughout all the communities of Chicago and all the people in Chicago. One of my jobs is to try to make sure that happens. So that's why I decided to put together the Cook County Commission, Cannabis Commission, and all of the commissioners, including my dear friend Donna, they unanimously supported it. So I wanted to create the commission so that we can really focus on just two things. And that is relative to this new huge business, which is now has been started in Illinois. Our focus will be, let's make sure social equity applicants are a part of this process, are included in this process. And then let's also make sure some of the resources that are flowing from this new business actually land in the disproportionately impacted areas of the city. And I say the city only because my third district, my Cook County district, is an all Chicago district. I represent parts of 14 of the 50 wards. But everything that I do, it's in concert with Donna, and everything we do, it's mindful of the South Side, it's mindful of the West Side, and it's mindful of the South suburbs. That is the voice that we bring to each and everything that we do as Cook County commissioners. And the Cook County Cannabis Commission is an example of that. Now, I'm not an expert. What I am is a vehicle. And I'm a vehicle to make sure that I can get the information I need from experts like you, Rob, so that I can actually fulfill the mission of my commission. And that's why we have 25 to 30 subject matter experts already who have said yes to the commission, including yourself. Again, thank you. And the subject matter experts are focusing really in 4 areas, focusing on economic development and focusing within that on the social equity applicants, focusing on criminal justice and restorative justice, focusing on public health, and then lastly, we're focusing on legislation and policy. You know, I heard another friend of mine, Sandy, is a part of the meeting today, and that's great because he doesn't know it yet, but he's going to be a subject matter relative to legislation and policy. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a collaborative effort for us to ensure that this state does what they need to be doing relative to this burgeoning business. And I'm excited about it. So I'm joined on the Cannabis Commission, John Daly. Commissioner John Daly is the vice chair. Commissioners Alma Anaya serves on the commission. Commissioner Scott Britton, Commissioner Brandon Johnson, Commissioner Deborah Sims, and Commissioner Pete Silvestri. We also have a representative on the commission from the county's Bureau of Finance, from the Department of Economic Development or Zoning, from Justice Advisory Council, and from the Cook County Department of Public Health. So as we go forward with the work of the commission, and today we've had one meeting, as you know, it was June 11th. It was a great meeting, and we heard from Portia Mittens during that meeting relative to concerns and issues facing the social equity applicants. We heard from Quinn Rollins, who spoke about the state's R3 program and the the goal of that program to have organizations assist social equity applicants as they go through the process, as they try to deal with GATA and other types of potential barriers. And we had Toy Hutchinson, who is really the cannabis czar, as appointed by Governor Pritzker. And it was just wonderful hearing from them. And it's just step one. You know, we're going to keep on pushing on this. We're going to keep on asking these questions. You know, as we look at our history, we can learn a lot. People of color only received an ownership interest for 2% of the medicinal dispensaries. That right there is our clarion call. We cannot allow this opportunity to have a similar result, and we won't. And as we look at the county, keep in mind, our job as commissioners, we don't make law. What we do is we breathe life into law when it flows to us from Springfield. So that's what we're going to do here as well. But what we do have is land. Cook County has land. So actually, the only reason why I'm dropping off early today, around 4:30, is because I have a meeting set up with another one of our fellow commissioners, Bridget Gaynor, to talk about the land bank, and specifically the vacant land which the land bank owns. And you're talking about 70% of their properties are vacant land. And I want to talk about ways that we can utilize the land for purposes of social equity applicants and the recreational cannabis process. Already at the county, we have tax incentive programs relative to developing on vacant land for both retailers and manufacturers. Through ordinance, I'm looking forward to expanding this into the social equity applicant space as well. I think that the only barrier we have is our own creativity. I think that there are going to be so many different opportunities which flow from the cannabis industry that it's incumbent on us, all of the subject matter experts, all of you who are joining us today, to collaborate, put our heads together so that we can make sure that the intended purpose of this legislation is actualized. I always say, Donna's probably sick of me saying it, effective leadership is rooted in communication, which is listening as much as talking, collaboration and action, but we have a real opportunity now to do just that. So big picture, that's my focus. That's where we're headed, and I'm here to say that's what we're going to get.
Okay, I want to dig a little bit deeper on one thread that you alluded to earlier when you talked about the fact that the Cook County Cannabis Commission covers the entire city and suburbs and you know, west
and
side.
Unincorporated Cook.
And unincorporated Cook. But
Yeah.
I want to turn to Donna for a second, because I know that Donna is passionate about the Southland, and I'm from the South suburbs, so you know I'm passionate about the Southland too. So I want to just talk a little bit about, and this kind of dovetails into some of the comments that I've heard from some SEAs, that all of the efforts around cannabis seem to be more city focused, and that there wasn't as many resources available to the South suburbs. And again, from an economic development standpoint, Bill, I agree with you. I think that this is a huge boom and an opportunity for communities of color in particular to benefit from this extremely lucrative nascent industry. So Donna, have you had any, I want to offer any perspective on how we can make sure that the South suburbs are included in this process and make sure that the South suburbs gets its fair share?
Well, thank you, Robert. And I want to thank everyone who is on this call to listen in. I'm here to learn as well as provide a little bit of perspective about the Southland. So first is, let me say this, because I really appreciate my colleague Bill Lowry for putting this commission together focused on cannabis, because this, as a growing industry that's going to be years in the making, really needs to have focus. And for those on the call who might not know, I always like to reference that, you know, Cook County is the second largest county in the entire country. That being said, whatever happens here is replicatable and duplicatable, and also model setting for things that could happen across our country that we can take to other counties, and they can make that happen in their area. So I say that because we have a huge opportunity here, and I know as us having Toy Hutchinson on the state level and focused on the social justice part of this whole initiative in the business, that this is going to create huge opportunities for, like I said, decades to come, but also create models that may have never been focused on before. So my area incorporates 36 municipalities, and also for those who don't know, there's 130 municipalities in all of Cook County. So Chicago is 50% of those municipalities, but the other 50% reside in the suburban Cook area. So when I think of all the opportunities for cannabis and hemp, not only from a land perspective, but you know, I've been focused on it from a healthcare perspective since the beginning for medicinal purposes, since that was legalized here. But now we're going to have a more expansive market and more opportunities for dispensaries and farms and growing areas. And what that's going to do for the Southland is huge. I think we have perfect amounts of land. I always joke because I live right next to a farm. Our subdivision used to be a farm. So we have farming areas that can be redeployed into hemp farms or other opportunities once that is an opportunity. But I wanted to also focus on an initiative that Cook County Board President put together for the Southland called the Southland Economic Growth Initiative, that is focused on other key areas that are going to be a part of this business, the cannabis and hemp business. So the South Suburban Economic Growth Initiative is focused on 3 key areas, which are transportation, logistics, and food service. So as we see this industry grow, all of those areas are going to be already part of this industry, and would be great opportunities again for minorities and other social equity business partners to join in transportation, in logistics, in food service, in the cannabis industry as well. So I am here to listen and make sure that we're taking some of those initiatives into account so that we can grow our knowledge as far as what that means, but also pay specific attention to areas that have huge opportunities for growth. Now, I know some people think, you know, the south suburbs are really far away. It's not that far. When you look at 25 miles, it's not that far from the downtown Chicago. It's 25 miles to Evanston, and people don't say that's far from downtown Chicago. So it's all perspective that we need to put into our whole way of thinking about how the business opportunities are growing. So I appreciate being here today. I think this is a great group of people who have knowledge beyond mine. So I'll lean on your expertise, but I'm here to provide any guidance or support that I'm able.
Well, thank you, Donna. And we definitely want to take you up on that because, again, I agree with you. I think there's tremendous opportunity in the Southland. It's rich with opportunity. So I want to shift back, though. Part of the reason for convening this meeting or this fireside chat, as Amy referred to it, is, and this is my perspective, is that I think that there's been somewhat of a black box of information as it relates to the process. And a lot of the complaints and a lot of the experiences of the SEAs, particularly given a lot of them have a lot of money invested in the potential opportunity to obtain a license, right, and they just don't know what's going on. So one of the things I hope to accomplish today, and Bill, hopefully you can shed a little light And we did reach out to Toy as well. She is a good friend, but it was a schedule conflict. So all disclosure, we did try to get the person that would have the probably the most real-time information. But to the extent that you can shed any light on just what's going on in terms of the licensing process and where we are with it, so that the SCAs who are on the phone or viewing could just have some kind of sense as to what's going on with their investment.
So first of all, Rob, thank you. And to the extent there's any answer that's needed and I can't provide it, or no one who right now is a part of this meeting can provide it, please know I will get the information, and then I'll reach out to Toy and we'll follow up with you directly with that. So everyone who has a question, if we don't answer it today, we'll get it answered. It's been frustrating for all of us. You know, when at the time I convened our first meeting, the dispensary licenses were all supposed to have been awarded by May 1st. And because of COVID, we were told then that had to be extended to July 1st. Well, it's been extended again. And as I talk to you, I don't have another date even. Similarly, when you looked at the awarding of licenses for craft growers and infusers and the transporters, that was supposed to, all those were supposed to be awarded by July 1st. And that did not occur. And even by the time of our first commission meeting, the date was mid-August. Now that's been extended. So I do not know what is the targeted date for purposes of awarding all of the licenses in those 4 areas. I will continue, like you, to push to find out. I'll be frank, I'm not even sure the state knows at this point. What is clear is that the period for submitting applications has closed. You know, I had a dear friend of mine call, and he was interested in trying to apply for a dispensary license at this time. And it was very clear that that ended in January, that allowance. And instead, I told him through the source I had, let's prepare for you to be ready to roll in January of 2021, because there are going to be even more licenses available relative to dispensaries at that time than what we saw last January. That's my understanding. The great concern, well, I have many, but one of the great concerns I have about the delay is the fact, let's take craft growers, for instance. In order to be awarded a craft grower license, you have to have a growing facility. So that means individuals are either leasing space or they've purchased space. Exactly. And I think it's just patently unfair to have that requirement, and then the feet are being dragged after that. And what's even probably equally unsettling for me is I've now had it confirmed that just supplying an address won't be enough if you're seeking an infuser or a transporter license. You have to have some type of facility there as well. So Rob, it just honestly seems like the further we go down this road, the more speed bumps are being placed before us. All I can say is I'll continue trying to get answers, sharing the information, and together we've got to keep pushing to hold the legislative intent. We have to make sure that this happens, because all of these delays are just reasons why we're going to see less participation and inclusion relative to our social equity applicants. And that means we're going to see money not flowing to the disproportionately impacted areas of the county.
I couldn't agree more. So something you said earlier, I want to also harken back to I love the phrase when you said that the job of a commissioner is to breathe the law into the
life into it
that has been enacted in Springfield. And one of the things that I always talk about is there's a difference between the spirit of the law in this legislation and the letter of the law.
Right.
And I don't think that either the spirit or the letter of the law have been adhered to as it relates to this process. And when I sent you that text back in December, I told you that, you know, my goal is to make sure that SEAs didn't get pimped. Anybody who's had any conversation with me about this that's what I'm focused on. And this feels like we're getting pimped. So from the standpoint of what is it that the commission can do to breathe life into the law, or the commissioners can do to breathe life into the law to try to help ameliorate this pimping? Because what's happening is that these MSOs who are out here operating, they're getting additional runway while the SEAs are being locked out of the market until who knows when.
And those folks are already born on second base.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So is there anything that we can do? I mean, and that's the second part of this, I know, is to talk about advocacy, but do you have any opinion about anything that we should be doing, or how we can address some of the current circumstances that are being, that exist?
Yeah, the next commission meeting is being set in September, and every meeting I have will feature our subject matter experts and a representative from the state. Some will include someone from the city once we know what the city's doing, but that's not to say we don't do anything until September. I think it would be great for us to put together a meeting such as this, where we do have representatives of the state there. I'll certainly be there. I can't speak for Donna, but if her schedule allows, she certainly will be there. But nothing's going to do it other than us applying the pressure. So my suggestion is, and I know there was outreach, relative to our mutual friend Toy. Toy's in a billion different directions, but there's someone who can talk and who can give us an idea of what the immediate planning is going on at the state. And if there's not someone who can do that, that means that there is a purposeful avoidance of trying to set out the plan. We need to fight that as well. So I would suggest that the two of us take on, as an action plan, getting those folks to do something like this within the next 30 days.
I agree. I think maybe it was in one of your earlier comments or somewhere I saw that there was a disparity study that was going to be conducted. Can you speak to that if you can? Otherwise,
Yeah. I can confirm that the disparity study has started as it was supposed to.
Okay.
We're supposed to have the results by, I want to say it's March of 2021. I'm being told that that's going to be extended because of all of the same factors we're talking about.
And I apologize, but can you back up and explain to everybody who may not know what that disparity study is and what the purpose of it is?
The stated purpose of the disparity study is to determine whether or not there has been discrimination relative to the application of cannabis laws. And to the extent that there has been discrimination, who has been the recipient of it, which communities have been the recipient of that. We're talking about individuals, we're talking about families, and we're talking about overall communities. I don't think that there's much of a chance that we won't find that the answer is yes, yes, and yes. But that is the purpose of the study. Honestly, Rob, and I could be wrong, this is Bill Lowry talking, I see that as another delay tactic. We know that there's been
Right.
disparate treatment and discrimination. This is just a process where we'll have another layer to say yes. We're moving forward as though that disparity study has already come back and confirmed what we all believe it will show.
Okay. So again, to harken back to the purpose of the commission, how can the commission, the Cannabis Commission, advance either the belief that you just espoused, that we know that there is discrimination in the industry, and further move to protect and advance the interests of the SEA community?
Opportunity, being a partner relative to creating true opportunity for our social equity applicants. That can be favorable opportunities to get land. And when I say that, again, they're tax incentives which are given to developers already to get Cook County land for purposes of building, manufacturing, or retail, and there's certain expectations placed on them, giving back to the community. I think that that's an opportunity for us to do something similar here. Cook County will derive 3% of the tax which is received by the state of Illinois relative to cannabis. I think we already have collected $52 million in taxes as a state. But we want to at least try. And it's a rough time. It's a rough time because COVID, the county is facing a deficit. But I certainly would like to see a portion of that 3%, which is collected by the county, filter into the work of the commission. And I would also like to see us have a conversation about low interest bearing loans for social equity applicants who are going through this. This is a very costly process just to apply. There are costs associated in the application process, which are higher than I certainly anticipated. You often have to have costs associated with attorneys, accountants. There are various things. We need to come up with vehicles so that we can make it easier for social equity applicants to get through this process. I mean, as is right now, you pay these costs, and if you don't get the awarded license, you can't get those costs back.
Exactly.
There's an opportunity,
Right.
So I know that at this point, a lot of this is what may happen, what can happen, but that really is what we need to be doing at this point. We need to be putting our heads together to chart together the plan forward. So big picture, I see it as an opportunity to get land. I see it as an opportunity to get support as you go through the process, monetary support as you go through the process. And then I think we need to look always at trying to make sure those who are in this space without being social equity applicants are still required to give back, because of the intent of this legislation is to make up for past wrongs that affected social equity applicants, their families in certain communities, not all 77, certain communities in Chicago. In the Chicagoland area.
You said a lot when you said that piece. I want to go back to that, but one of the pieces that I want to tag on to that, and you kind of alluded to, is education. Because one of the things that I've seen in doing this work is, and that first of all, it was an extremely rushed process, a very short turnaround from the time that the law was enacted to applications were the application deadline ended. And what I've always said is, if you take a group who you have identified as disadvantaged and you put them in the most competitive scenario possible, where you're in a highly regulated, essentially illegal industry, and want them to try to figure out how to navigate within that industry and raise capital, which most minority and women-owned businesses can't do under normal circumstances. And now you're talking about putting it in a cannabis context.
Right.
Is there any resources, or what's your perspective in terms of, again, what the commission or the county or the state can do to try to make more education available to help SEAs who are disadvantaged, not just from a financial standpoint, but often from an educational, informational standpoint?
I think it has to be purposeful. We need to partner with subject matter experts like you and actually set up these forums within our district so that the information can be shared. We also really need collaboration by government here. And I'll give you an example. You know, you talk about the monetary piece of this business. Toy and I have talked about this, and I've had separate conversations with Mike Frericks. You know, while we wait for the SAFE Act to be moved on at the federal level, and it will at some point because the money's big here, but we need to make sure that we've got credit unions that are available for people to put resources into, so they're not carrying everything around on their person. And then what we talked to Treasurer Frericks about is actually having a commitment to start state banks for the purpose, express purpose of the cannabis industry. So I think it's a combination of us continuing to push so that the whole process is easier for individuals. But in the interim, it's also incumbent on us to make sure we're bringing all of us together to talk about what's working, what isn't working, and what are the opportunities. And I'm willing to join that at any time. And I think most of us are, but I think that's important to do. You guys keep hearing me talk about the state. That's because the state right now, they are the player here. And I'm not at all saying there's not a role for me and Donna and people at the city level, but we've got to make sure that we're keeping the pressure on those individuals, because this legislation flowed from them. And that's why I keep saying that. It's very important. And I will keep doing everything I can to make sure I am bringing Toy Hutchinson to all of the people. I am bringing Quinn Rollins on behalf of R3 to all of the people. That's what we need to do. And those are also the people talking directly, Robert, to the governor.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's an important distinction that I'm glad you keep making, because this is state legislation, so there's an extreme role for them to play. And a lot of these questions that I'm directing to you could easily and probably more appropriately be directed to some of our state officials. But
and truthfully, to be very frank, Toy actually said to me, and said it during our meeting, she says, I'm so happy you started this commission, because she has a lot of frustration right now. And she's not feeling the same level of interest and cooperation from some other units of government. So that's why, you know, we're going to keep on collaborating, keep on working with her. But I do want to be clear. She's doing everything she can to try to push on this. You know, there are aspects that Toy is still pushing on that we just haven't gotten to yet. And in her words, it's like, well, there's still more to do. But she absolutely is pushing for consumption spaces to be allowed and awarded and the like. And there are other things. So this is very early. We're starting, but you're right. it's gone on long enough that you almost get a sense that in some ways we're already falling behind, and that's something none of us want and none of us are comfortable with.
Well, I mean, so I'm glad you raised that. And Donna, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm going to come back in a second, but we're getting into the meat of some of the concerns that the SEAs have, and I want to make sure that I address those because it's already an unlevel playing field. That much is clear to your earlier point about the disparity. But there's also, from what we have seen, some corruption on top of disparity. That I think, and again, I know that this is a state mandated program and is regulated by the state, but my job is to make you aware, to the extent that you may not have been, that, you know, again, SEAs have been taken advantage of, not just from getting a late start in the game, but there's been some outright, from what we have been able to witness, manipulation of the law. In terms of how SEAs were approached to join groups that were not reflective of what the spirit of the law is. In other words, 51% control and ownership, and basically were approached with, you know, side deals to try to get them to pay for their blackness or their whatever component of SEA that they satisfied. So. From a policing standpoint, again, I don't know if there's a role that the commission can play, because I've had these conversations with folks at the state, that what is it that we're going to be able to do, and what is it that in your mind we should do to be able to root out those bad actors who are not living up to either the spirit or the letter of the law, and really, again, taking advantage of a group that has already been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs and now being re-victimized again.
I think that first of all, thank you. And I think we can utilize similar situations in the non-cannabis space as we look for answers in the cannabis space. Example, what you described has happened for years relative to government contracts. For years.
Yeah, MBE, WBE.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What do we know we can do if that's disclosed? We can pull that contract. We can pull that from that person, right? At a minimum, we can do that. By ordinance, there's no reason why I could not propose the same thing relative to the cannabis space. If we're able to show someone is acting contrary to the letter of the law, that can be a ground for them to be taken out of this process. And I think that that's the kind of thing that makes perfect sense, and I'd be happy to be the vanguard with that. So we'll just take the same position we take with the individual doing the same thing relative to a regular construction contract, and we'll apply it to this space.
And can we get, so I'm on board, and I'm here to help you in every way that we can to try to, because that's something that I'm very concerned about. And as, again, if folks were able to raise their hand or voice their opinion on the call, I mean, that to me is one of the number one issues that I don't think has been adequately addressed throughout this process, is how many people are being re-victimized and being taken advantage of. We can have a number of conversations offline in terms of fights that I've been in with folks that have been trying to create these organizations under the guise of promoting education for SEAs, but instead what they were doing was having them enter into these agreements that were not favorable to the SEAs.
So the way you do it, you say pursuant to the law, you point out the 51%, you point out the conduct of the entity that is not abiding by that. And then the measure says, so you're not going to be allowed to do business in Cook County. I cannot affect Tazewell County, but that's how you would do it relative to Cook County. And again, we're not creating law, we're applying the law, we're breathing life into the law as it was written.
So to that point, so everybody on board, we got a commitment from the county that we're going to go after these folks. So thank you for that. If nothing else,
the two of us are going to put it together.
Accomplished today. But let's keep going down that thread just a little bit more, because are there other things that you've seen about the law that need additional life breathed into them or need blown out in terms of not being likely to effectuate the goals that we want to accomplish with this legislation?
Again, my focus with this commission, it's twofold: social equity applicants in disproportionately impacted areas. I've talked about some of the issues I have with the current process, what's going on, and the effect on social equity applicants, as well as our community, certain communities, our communities. To the extent there are other things, I need to hear it from my subject matter experts like you did today. So
let me give you another one.
Please do. Please do. No, I appreciate this.
So the definition of social equity applicant is, you've been arrested, you live in a DIA, somebody in your family that's been arrested or lives. So we know what that's the letter of the law.
Right.
Going back to the spirit of the law, there are folks who have means, who have also been arrested, that technically, under the letter of the law, qualify as social equity applicants. So you could be a rich white guy living in Winnetka, and if you got arrested, you technically could be a social equity applicant.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the spirit. And my reading is that is not the spirit of the law. So to the extent that we could, again, we don't have to, boil the ocean here, but that is another issue that has often been raised by SEAs who live in, a DIA or who we believe legitimately fit the aim and the objective of the legislation. This was not designed to make rich white guys who smoked weed when they were 13 or 14 and got popped for it. This was not designed to give them an advantage.
So I think my suggestion is we start off by looking at not only the actual wording of the legislation, but the actual legislative intent document. Literally, I just had a hand in new legislation, COVID-related legislation in another realm. We literally prepared question and answers, which is the legislative intent piece, which is attached to that legislation. I don't know if you have, but I haven't yet seen that relative to this measure. That's where I would start, because that might give you and us the answer right there in black and white, how this can be addressed.
Okay. So Donna, I want to turn back to you just for a second, because again, I know that primarily you wanted to be in listening mode, but would there, you kind of said something that piqued my interest earlier, and it may have been you or Bill, I'm trying to look at my notes, but the availability of land and the availability of the county to be able to engage in perhaps opening up businesses that are either cannabis related or otherwise, just from an economic development standpoint. And then also, I think there's also a great workforce development opportunity, because everybody doesn't necessarily want to own a dispensary, but some folks want to work in the industry, but they need an industry or some place to work. And there aren't currently a whole lot of places like that in the suburbs, in the south suburbs. So what's the process, or can you speak just a little bit in terms of what it would involve in terms for us to begin to open some businesses, whether they be cannabis related or ancillary type businesses in the Southland, so that folks, at least as they're making their decisions about where to live, work, and play and pray, that they know that the Southland is open to them as an option.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. That's great. I know, Bill mentioned about the land bank, so that there is a Cook County land bank that has residential as well as commercial property, but there's also a South Suburban land bank, which is a separate entity on its own, and it has properties that are more commercial only in nature. So I would say that's another avenue to go down to see about properties that might be available. And then there's also, I mentioned earlier, the focus of the South Suburban Economic Growth Initiative, which is has formed a separate entity called the Southland Development Authority. The Southland Development Authority is 45 different municipalities from across the south and southwest suburbs that would also have access to that kind of information about land, opportunities, businesses that might want to come in and do partnerships. From a workforce and training and development standpoint, there is a lot of opportunity to have training centers, and that's part of what the SDA will be focused on as well, as far as workforce goes for the businesses that would be coming into the area. And another side note is that I don't know if everyone on the call might know, but there's going to be 2 large Amazon facilities now coming out into the south suburbs, one in Markham and one in Matteson. And both of those will also provide other opportunities for workforce development, but also it's going to open up other businesses to come around where those facilities will be. They're going to be major robotic. The one that's going to be in Matteson is going to be a state-of-the-art facility, the first one of its kind, even for Amazon. So that's going to be really technologically advanced. So I think there are a lot of avenues to go down to explore for business opportunities that would be around these areas. But also, like you said, everyone's not going to want to have the dispensary or the grow facility, but the other businesses that are associated with anything cannabis or hemp related are going to be an important part that I think would be a great place for the Southland to own those businesses.
Outstanding. Well, I
So
know
let me
we got
just-
to wrap
let me
this
just-
up because I know.
Can I just add one thing, Rob? Thanks.
Yeah.
Donna, thank you. And I just want to underscore, Commissioner Deborah Sims is on the commission. And of course, she is another powerful voice for not only the county, but the Southland. I'd like to set up a separate time for us to just focus on this very important issue from the perspective of our social equity applicants in the Southland. And that's something I'm going to commit to. Donna, I'm going to ask you to join me with that. And then we'll certainly loop in Commissioner Sims. But I think if this is very important, that's something that I also will commit to.
Great. So
Thank you, Bill. High five.
A couple of questions that were out in the chat, and I know Bill and Donna have to pop off, but I want to try to summarize them, and then I'll go to the next section of this. And one is around, again, Bill, this is probably more in your wheelhouse. Do you have any sense, or was there a target in terms of the number of licenses that are being awarded? If there's a percentage that's going to be allocated towards SEAs, or do you have any insight on that whatsoever?
If there is a percentage, no one has shared it with me. What I do know is Cook County will house probably 70 or 71% of all of the licenses which are going to ultimately be awarded. So we will certainly be able to impact it, but I am not aware of any percentage relative to participation or inclusion.
Okay, and then the last question, because a bunch of them, these are kind of around the same topic. The 1,500-foot linear rule that is kind of contributed to this delay. Can you just briefly explain that to folks and the impact that it has had on the delay?
Well, as I understand it, you cannot be closer to an existing dispensary than 1,500 feet. And one problem that we've seen is there are a lot of dispensaries which exist because of the medicinal cannabis licenses. So you have individuals who already are set up. They are allowed an opportunity now to expand into recreational cannabis, and others who are new to the space cannot come within that certain closeness to them. So that's had an effect. And there are other effects. You have to be certain feet away from schools and different other things. Again, I'm not saying that there's no reason for it, but I am saying it has made it even more difficult for individuals who are new to this space to be given the opportunity. And our social equity applicants, by and large, are new to this space.
Yeah, thank you. I know you guys got to go, and I'm getting a hook from Amy. So I really want to thank both you and Donna for your time, your candor, and your support. And we will definitely work with you, Bill and Donna, as well, to get these questions to Toy or whomever, and try to work to just make the environment more transparent and more supportive of SEA. So again, thank you for your leadership and your commitment to our community. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much.
Robert, thank you, and thank you for your leadership. And I'm really excited about trying to get this thing done the right way with your help and your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I echo that as well. You guys are doing amazing work and really opening up the lines of communication for so many who might not have it. So I appreciate being able to be a small part of this conversation and look forward to what's up next. So thanks, Amy and Robert.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Great. And I thank you guys as well. We will definitely still be in touch in the future. I also wanted to play on one thing that Robert was talking about earlier, which is the whole notion of the predatory practices, those trying to hook up with people for some of the wrong intention, and the notion of trying to access capital. They seem to go together as topics. We're not yet at the point where we're specifically announcing, but very soon we are going to announce a partnership that is going to really take a real close lens towards this whole topic of access to capital. And I'm going to just say that as a pause. If you join us in some of the subsequent meetings that we're having in the next couple of weeks, we'll go into a little bit more detail about what we're talking about. But we are really trying to get closer to being able to provide both a service and also an expectation of what it means to participate in the market for capital and to get away from, to really understand predatory practices and how to avoid them. So we're going to just use that as a placeholder, but we're going to continue this discussion with two other guests who are here today. So Sandy and Akele, you guys can here. Thank you very much for joining us. So Akele is attorney. He's an attorney at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where he works to advance racial equality and inclusion in the marketplace, particularly within the cannabis industry. He's a member of the board of directors for Chicago Normal and the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition. He's also a member of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force for the Cannabis Trade Federation, which I guess is a newer organization, I think, than the other two. So that's exciting. Akele was an in-house attorney for Green Thumb GTI. And everybody knows Green Thumb is one of the largest publicly traded cannabis companies in the US. So thank you for joining us, Akele. I'm really excited to hear you speak here. And then there is Sandy Stein. Sandy, thank you so much. Sandy is a veteran attorney. He's been in this cannabis space as a cannabis attorney since it started here in Illinois back in the beginning of the medical time. His experience with government regulations is vast and deep. He's been in a lot of different emerging industries. I've had great conversations with him about environmental law, and everybody knows that this cannabis legislation was a real champion of the environmental protections and also of real estate and zoning. So I know that his big focus is specifically on cannabis for today's conversation. But he does a lot of international work as well. So thank you so much, Sandy and Akele, for joining us. I'm going to turn it back to Robert, who's going to ask you guys some questions. And again, I'm just really glad that you're here and you were able to join us today.
Great, thanks, Amy. Welcome, gentlemen. I saw both of you had participated in the earlier part of the panel discussion with Donna and Bill, so I'm going to go a little bit off script, and I'm sure I'm going to get a text from Amy, but nevertheless, I'm going to do it anyway. Anything that you want to comment on relative to what we just heard, particularly as it relates to the sort of the delay and just sort of the environment where SEAs have been, in my view, so this is a leading question to two lawyers, where in my view that the SEAs have been kind of kept in a black box from an information standpoint. Any perspective, and we'll start with you, Sandy, because I think that's the way I was supposed to start in the first place. So I think you're on mute, Sandy. Or at the very least, we can't hear you.
He's on mute. You're not on mute, but something is muted on his.
All right, so we're going to go with you, Akele, first, and while Sandy figures out his mic.
Yeah, so yeah, there's definitely some things that are pretty concerning about the delay from a competitive standpoint. Existing multi-state operators are really accumulating a really significant competitive advantage because of the delay. So I'll talk about how that, how the delay is directly impacted, sort of these social equity businesses that plan to come online, but just talk about the market generally. I mean, they are really accumulating a significant competitive advantage. That means, additional consumer loyalty and brand loyalty, market, further market penetration, in addition to, making hundreds of millions of dollars with little competition in the marketplace. I think this first mover advantage is really significant. And then there's also these operational efficiencies. And so, that first mover advantage, in addition to the operational efficiencies, I think really do set up, make things are going to make things pretty difficult for social equity applicants when they do enter the marketplace. And then also, those social equity applicants who are, spending money to hold their locations or whatever the case may be, on waiting for a license. If we're thinking about those true social equity applicants, the ones that are consistent with the spirit of the bill, then there's a good chance they don't have all this additional capital to sort of just burn. I know when I was in the industry, when we go through the application process in another state, we spent a lot of money on holding that real estate month to month to month, and oftentimes through delays, because delays aren't uncommon. I mean, I know we're talking a lot about the delays in this round of licensing, but there were delays in the first round, and under the medical program, I think there was like a 6-month delay. There's been delays in the award of licenses in every market that I've ever been involved in the application process or just been privy to it. It's sort of to be expected, but it's still unfortunate, especially for those craft growers who have to have a location locked down, and especially if you want those locations in the most competitive areas in the city, those most lucrative areas in the city. Those are going to be the most expensive to continue to lock down and to hold. Looks like Sandy is.
We have 2 Sandys now.
Yeah.
Nice.
And we can't hear either one of them.
Well, actually, the first one, oh no. Okay, Sandy, are you?
All right, so I'm not sure what's going on with Sandy's technical situation, but so Akele, I'll shift back to you, and Sandy, just raise your hand when you think we can hear you. But one of the things that I was going to ask Sandy, and perhaps you can weigh in on it, and he can weigh in as well. Again, I started with asking Bill this. Can you shed any light on this rulemaking period, in terms of what you may know or why it has been such a morass, and what's going on?
Yeah, I could talk about that. So, in a lot of states, there's been ties and lawsuits around the issuance of dispensary licenses, craft grow licenses, cultivation licenses, and all that. And so to sort of help avoid, tons and tons of litigation, which will arise inevitably, but to sort of minimize it, the state came up with a tiebreaker process for dispensary awards. And so initially they issued, the rules for this tiebreaker process through an emergency rule, which can only be effective for 180 days from the date that, it went into effect. And unfortunately, that date ended up being, I think, June 5th, 2020, this summer, although the licenses were supposed to be issued on May 1, 2020. And so because those rules lapsed, even if the state were ready to issue those dispensary licenses, they wouldn't have this tiebreaker rule to sort of give them additional comfort on, one, how to break ties in a way that, isn't arbitrary or doesn't, invite lawsuits. And then two, just in a way that, gives them additional comfort that the process was transparent and fair. So with the tiebreaker rule that was established through the emergency rules, essentially there would be a lottery that would break ties in the scoring process for dispensary licenses. So say that there's a particular BLS region, and this is broken down by BLS region. It's not for all 75 licenses, it's broken down. So say for the Chicago BLS region, there are 47 licenses available, and say that, maybe the first 40 are won outright, and there's 5 left. I'm saying outright meaning there's no ties. Of course, that's probably not going to be the case. There's probably tons of ties, but let's just say that the first 40 licenses were won without ties. Then the remaining 7, there were multiple ties. So say for one license there, or say there's 3 people that got 230, and that's their tie. So in order to break that process, the state would use a lottery to figure out who got that final license. And so that was sort of the best way, even despite the other sort of tiebreaker bonus point provisions that were included in the application process itself, or that's like the community engagement plan and all that. So that's where we're at now. And so because that tiebreaker that was initially enacted through emergency rule expired on June 5th, the state needed to go through a formal rulemaking process, because you can only enact emergency rules once within a 24-hour period, is my understanding. And so they needed to go through this formal rulemaking process in order to enact this tiebreaker process again. And so basically through the Illinois Administrative Procedure Act, the General Assembly has delegated to like executive branch state agencies like the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, the right to implement these sort of statutory laws, administrative laws, and rules like this tiebreaker process. But in order to do that, typically you have to go through the standard rulemaking process, which could be anything from 90 days at best, which is highly unlikely, to like 365 days. It could be longer than that. And so through this formal rulemaking process, there's also a public comment period. So there's 2 sort of formal notice periods. And so those notice periods the first notice period starts once the relevant agency submits or publishes the notice of that rule in the Illinois Register. And so the Illinois Register is basically this publication that the state publishes that includes all the different proposed rules and recently enacted rules and rules that are being commented on, so that the public can follow those easily. And so I think that gets published weekly, every Friday. And so that's the first stop if you were trying to figure out what's going on there. And so there'll be that first notice period, and that started June 19th, 2020, because that was when the most recent sort of permanent rule proposal was published in the Illinois Register for this tiebreaker process. And so, that's at least 45 days, but it can be longer. And so it's open for public comment. The way that you would comment on that, there's an address in the Illinois Register, and also in the Flynn report, which I'll talk about in a minute, where you see the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulations address, and you can send your comments to them if you have comments on this tiebreaker rule. And then after that, there's a potentially public hearings. And so there's another agency, the Joint Committee on Administrative Regulations, that also has to review, called JCAR, also has to review any proposed rules by any state agency. And so they have some time to review it, which I'll get to next. But for that period, they can request a public hearing. The governor, certain local governments that are impacted, like Chicago, 25 people or an association that represents at least 100 individuals can request a public hearing on a proposed rule by a state agency within 14 days of the date that proposed rule is published in the Illinois Register. So it doesn't have to happen, but it can. So if that happens, then that would potentially delay things a little bit. And then after that initial first notice period, then the state agency, after accumulating all the public comments and other relevant comments, would submit the rule to JCAR for review. And so JCAR would have another 45 days, and Sandy can clarify some of this if I'm off on the dates and times, but they would have another 45 days upon acceptance of that proposed rule for review to look into it and can take into consideration all these comments. And then after they consider all this, the state agency, so in this case IDFPR and JCAR, can discuss and decide if they need to extend JCAR's consideration under the second notice period for an additional 45 days, or if they feel like they're ready to make a decision, then they can make a decision on that. And so the decision that JCAR would make would be to essentially approve the rules So that's through like a certificate of no objection. They can make a recommendation about things that should change, or
Man, that's a
essentially
lot. Hold on.
object. Yeah, I was like, this is part of the law
Bro,
school.
man, that is probably the most thorough explanation I've ever heard. I mean, you should work for the commission. But Sandy, are you with us now?
I believe I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Success.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Great.
Yeah. So,
You know,
I mean, Akele just walked us through like a Moses parable of what it is that we got to do to get an answer. So I guess unless you have something to add to all of that, which I can't imagine.
No. Let me just say this. I was listening to Akele and I'm thinking, gee, am I lucky that I was unable to get on there, because you did a terrific and thorough job, and every detail was fabulous and reminding me of the pain that people have to go through, like ourselves, in getting through this ridiculous process. I could comment on the meaning behind the process, if there's any interest in that, or just move on. And I also did have a response, Robert, to your first question of what we could pick up on what the delays mean from the previous panel.
Yeah, let's do that, because I don't know how much I think we have 15 minutes. I really want to get into the advocacy and the organizing piece about
let me do real
how
quick
we can do all of that, what Akele said, because it sounds like there's a lot that needs to be done to do what he said.
There's an amazing amount. It's a process. And look, it's part of democracy. We kind of like these rules, because democracy is a series of checks and balances to make sure that cheaters can't cheat. And
that ain't working. That ain't working.
Yeah, right. We know that, but at least it tries its best. Let me get into this thing about the delays. You know, the delays that have occurred are due to COVID. Whether they're due to COVID or not, it's a great cover. It's like a blizzard or a flood. It's the common enemy. We can't blame anybody for it. So the scoring teams weren't able to get their work done. Maybe they were overwhelmed anyway. The point is, and Robert, you made this point, so did Bill Lowry. In fact, the whole team did, the panel did last time. And it distresses me too, as a person who doesn't necessarily qualify as SEA. It still bothers me that the purpose of this law was to advance SEA. Illinois is getting a lot of good credit across the country for doing this. And then we get stuck in this thing, and all it does is further empower and entrench the existing industry that has been there for a long time, and they will complain, oh my God, it was so hard to get started. Yeah. It's hard to get started. Okay, how you doing now, bro? You know, the point is that this continues to help them. So what can be done going forward to kind of right the wrong for the mid-course correction that had to occur because of COVID? First, only 75 of an authorized 500 dispensaries are permitted in this round. 425 are left to go. So there can be new rules, new legislation, talk about advocacy, to continue to advocate for the best interest of social equity in the next rounds and the rounds to come. Will they have been placed a little bit further behind? Yes. Can we try to fix that? We can't. What would some of those be? Set-asides, more product choices than available in other non-SEA or non-first round dispensaries, regional preferences, lower taxes, stimulus funding, low-interest loans, grants, application funding rebates if unsuccessful, a whole slew of things that we could think about. So there are ways to try to correct some of these problems. As to this rulemaking function, real quickly, yes, Akele went through the mechanics of it beautifully. Thank you. Look, the point of this is that you pass a bill through the legislative process. Those are inherently general in nature. What they typically do is punt to the executive branch and say, okay, agency, you do this. Department of Transportation, Department of Housing, Department of Public Health, you implement these things. And that's what the executive branch is supposed to do. But we don't want them just taking the legislative intent and running with it their own way. We want to tie them down to a set of rules that have public input. And that's the period we're in, this public input period, as Akele well pointed out. And again, simply a casualty of the COVID process. The emergency rules that were authorized ran out of time. And now we have to go through the normal rulemaking process, and it is painful, as you see.
So having said that, how should we organize ourselves? Because one of the points that you made earlier is that the MSOs are extremely well organized and extremely well financed, I might add. So given the SEA community is nascent in this industry, and I throw this open to both of you, what is the first step? I mean, all of that is great. What's the first, what do we need to do now coming out of this meeting, this virtual meeting, in terms of beginning to organize ourselves around those things that you talked about? Because I love the way you laid them out, and you said a word that I hadn't heard in a long time in Chicago, which is set aside. And that's something that I think was missing from this whole legislation piece. And I don't know if we had, I thought we had abolished that, but I don't think that it should have been abolished, because don't get me started on that. Let me hear from you guys.
Akele, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have set-asides run into certain issues there. I think the disparity study, to the extent that we want to try to create a program that would provide for set-asides for social equity applicants, the disparity study will give some sort of legal protection for the state, but generally most states are a little nervous about that, you know, so we have this very race-specific harm that we know occurred, and you can't really create a race-specific solution for that because of, you know, Supreme Court jurisprudence around quotas and whatnot and stuff. So the state of Ohio tried to do this, and they did create a program like that, and it got struck down, I think, you know, based on Ohio state constitutional reasons and federal. But, you know, maybe Sandy can speak more to this. I mean, something like that might be possible maybe for social equity applicants in particular. I think we've gotten something like the effect of that, because 20% of the points in the application process are reserved for social equity applicants. The problem is that too many people can qualify as social equity applicants. It's too broad of a category. And so it just really makes it so vulnerable to exploitation by people that aren't consistent, that aren't businesses consistent with the spirit of social equity.
So Akele is absolutely right. Again, set aside, I should put that down on my list because I like to examine how they can be done. They are difficult, and you have to worry about race-based advantages or disadvantages without getting into affirmative action, all that kind of stuff. However, the example that was given in the previous panel about how I used the same example, the wealthy mom living in the North Shore suburbs whose kid got busted at the University of Illinois for pot is just as much a social equity applicant as the person who was affected on the war on drugs. We could do means testing, for example, so we can put more of that spirit into it. And I think that would be legitimate. We'd have to do some legislative research on that, and it is a careful line to walk, but we'd have to do that. In terms of organizing for advocacy, the way the current industry association got started is that the medical licenses were granted first in Illinois, and they immediately formed a group, and they put money into it, and they immediately started to put that money behind political action. Shortly thereafter, the dispensaries came into it, and they formed their own group, and then they had intense discussions. I was part of that, actually, to see how to combine the groups so that they didn't fight with each other. And fundamentally, they did. Little things like, how much dues do you pay? There were only 20 grows, and there were 55 dispensaries. Therefore, dispensaries didn't have as much money. So who pays the greater amount of the dues? Who makes more money? Those kinds of things. But they effectively did that, but they were a small group, 20 grows and 50, well, it turned out to 50 dispensaries. So the whole group was 70, easy to manage. SEAs are a very broad category. Anybody who could qualify could be a member of the group. How much do they pay as dues? What are their benefits? What do they get out of it? And how do you manage that kind of group with so many different interests and various thoughts and points of view? I want to give to this guy. I don't believe in donations. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. Very, very hard to manage. So my suggestion is that the industry organize around some principles and have at least two levels of organization. One, kind of a steering committee, and people don't like that, and people don't like to be told what to do, but a steering committee that will essentially say, we're going to take our interests from the broad membership and allow to go with it. That's number one, because you have to have a manageable group. Secondly, money. It just takes some fundraising. There's a lot of things you can do, even in this current rulemaking proceeding, by making comments. The comments should be germane to the current rule, which is the emergency rules and the tie-breaking procedure. But there is actual benefit in stepping from behind the curtain and saying, here I am, announcing the SEA lobbying organization, what you want to call it, to the world. We're organized, we're ready, we're available, and we're capable. Look and see us. The Black Caucus is an excellent example of a group of people, small group of people who got together and became very, very important because they were unified. I say that because they are, and I've seen them work. I don't want to necessarily conflate social equity applicants with the Black community, because I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's necessarily intended or fair. But let's face it, a lot of people in need and who've been affected on the war on drugs are Black. And this is a period of Black entrepreneurship and Black social empowerment. I speak cautiously because I'm obviously not a black person, I'm a white person, but I can get that sense of empowerment for my friends and brothers and sisters who haven't been so affected. So those are some thoughts I would throw out to you.
One of the questions that I saw that I thought was interesting that I wanted to reserve for you guys is that from the SEA group that submitted questions was that there's a fear on the part of some SEAs about being too vocal, because once they get a license or if they are awarded a license, they may need to partner with some of the MSOs for supply or for whatever other reason, and how, so basically a fear of retaliation. So can you guys provide any, so that's one comment that I want you to respond to. And then the other thought is around what you just said, Sandy. I like the idea of kind of having an agenda and what that could look like, or as I think you called them, organizing principles or core principles. Let's speak to the first one first, and then maybe give you time to think about what some of those organizing principles could be.
Let me, if I can, jump on that first point and ask Akele. I do think this is a new industry and it's a nascent industry. And if we have industry infighting, it will only be to the detriment of everybody. So it's kind of like a family feud. You can yell and scream at your brother and sister, even your mom and dad. But when you go back on the street, you're a family and you'll fight to protect them. I think there's an important internal fight to be had, or at least discussion, perhaps, with the MSOs. But you're correct. Ultimately, they have some authority right now. They've run a successful program. People know how to find their dispensaries. So we need to embrace each other is really what it amounts to. But nevertheless, there needs to be some discussions. And we all know that you can attract more flies with honey than vinegar. I'm not saying we have to be sweet as pie with these guys, but we have to concede a point that I think they will readily accept and maybe will be willing to support. You've done it. We haven't. We need you. Can you help us? That might be one outreach, understanding that, and they've demonstrated this time and again, that they're really more out for themselves than they are for others.
Yeah, I think the concern that a lot of social equity applicants have expressed is very real. I think that we do need some regulatory protections around it. I don't think that it would be sort of this like broad sort of, bias against social equity apps. I think many MSOs will, try to work with certain social equity businesses to, make sure they have adequate supply of product and, access and knowledge of various business opportunities and all that kind of stuff, business development, partnership deals, all that stuff. But if a particular social equity applicant has been pretty aggressive in their advocacy on a particular issue, I would be completely shocked if that didn't have a negative impact on their ability to partner, source product or whatever from different operators. And ideally it shouldn't be like that. But from what, not saying any, obviously it's not the case right now, but I know that, people can be petty at times and stuff or just create bad blood. And I think that would potentially impact some folks.
If they advocate in their own interest, overtly in contravention to social equity, then there will not be an alliance. And we would have to form a countervailing group. And frankly, public opinion, at least legislative opinion, I believe, would find disfavor with a group of people who have been successful and empowered by the legislative activities if they took that stand. So there is some opportunity to give a handout, but also to say we will not let you control the whole industry without us. I mean, I think it's like every kind of classic adversarial process. There's opportunity, and there's discontent at times. One thing to be considered, and I just say this for what it is, the potential for cooperation is also two ways. There's upward mobility opportunity for SEAs within the MSOs, like them or not. They do have money, they have skill, they have knowledge, they have reach, they have national reach. So there's something to be gained. And many of them are going to be looking at the more successful SEA dispensaries as potential takeover targets. So there's a potential for inclusion in a different way should any successful dispensary operators or SEAs choose to look in that direction.
Yeah, I also agree with that. Just John, consolidation is kind of generally the trend in the industry regardless. And so I do think that likely it does come to that point. And so for a lot of SEAs, it is about positioning yourself in the best way to basically making yourself the most attractive acquisition candidate. For some, that's certainly going to be the goal. Just because that's
Yeah, we can have a whole nother conversation about that, because the whole idea behind this is to create wealth, and the only way you create wealth is through a liquidity event. And you know, that's another education that our community needs to understand, that you get wealth by selling shit. So whether it be your
There,
company,
we'll get there. We'll have that conversation.
yeah. So in any event, I think we're at the top of the hour, and I know that we need to begin to wrap up. So again, the last comment that I would love from each of you is, what's next? What would be the next immediate step for us to begin to organize the SEA community? I know, Sandy, you said it takes money and it takes an agenda, but can we get some level of commitment from the two of you that you guys will be our advocacy Sherpers and help us through this process?
Done it for 40 years, no reason to stop now.
Yeah, I'm all in. I mean, I'm in this. I think next steps certainly include creating a, lobbying organization or association for social equity businesses. I think there should probably be a minority association as well, because they do have unique interests and unique histories, in the war on drugs that, really were strong motivators for why we did what we did and create the program we created. But they certainly need to work together and kind of see some cooperation. Peace out.
All right, I'll make that the last word. I want to thank both of you for, again, a very thorough and enlightening discussion around a topic that I don't think we think enough about, in terms of how we can create a conduit for information both to the state and then back from the state to us. So it begins with organizing, as we've seen over the last few months with Black Lives Matter, and the power that a committed group of folks can have to change the world. So we're seeing an awakening in this country as a result of Black Lives Matter being steadfast in their commitment to address police brutality. So as we begin to develop within this nascent industry, if we can get a similar commitment from some folks that are interested in creating wealth as a result of the opportunities that this industry affords, then perhaps we could begin to see a shift in the balance of power in this industry and the balance of wealth in this industry. And ultimately, hopefully, it could then impact our communities at large. So with that, I will turn it back over to Amy to let her bring us home.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Akele. Thank you, Sandy. Fascinating, a very different kind of conversation for Momentum Lab. Very pertinent, because when we're talking about business interests, you do wind up, what the legislation is and what the process is to change it has everything to do with the interests of business. So thank you for being here. Thanks to everyone for taking time out of your Wednesday. The next time we get together will be the 28th. It's a Tuesday. Topic is real estate. We're looking forward to it, and happy summer until then. Bye all.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Robert.
Amy. Thanks to Momentum. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Akele. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Andy.